Hello there, folks. Thank you for taking a few moments to watch my recorded presentation. I'm very sorry not to be able to enjoy the conference in beautiful Madrid this summer, but the trip just wasn't in the cards for me. So I appreciate the fact that the conference is allowing us to pre-record our presentations and share them with you in this format. My name is Beecher. I'm a professor of design at The Ohio State University in the United States, and this is my presentation entitled Towards an Iterative Pedagogy, a 5-year journey designing an online design history course. Now, I'm sure we can all agree that iteration or dynamic updating is an essential aspect of the design process, no matter the product. This presentation explores the design of learning experiences online, and it's rooted in my experiences as a design educator for much longer than I would now like to admit. I'm grateful that my experiences have spanned what seem like revolutionary waves of exploration and discovery, though, from passive expert-centered professing to more dynamic student-centered models that allow knowledge to be discovered, and from live interactions to asynchronous models that curate resources to form what I hope becomes for my students a constructed quilt of learning and understanding. In this recording, I'll share my most recent experiences designing an asynchronous online introductory level history of design course at a large public university in the United States. It's part cautionary tale and part celebration of discovery that traces the iterative forms my course has taken over 9 sequential semesters, connecting refinements to key factors that higher education face today, at least in the United States. In the process, I will highlight the iteration's advantages as technologies evolve and cultures revolve. All of these things create challenges and opportunities for teaching with images and managing a so-called canon that constantly transforms in real time. So first, just a quick reminder of how educational approaches have evolved over the past 4 decades. I began my career as a design educator in the late 1980s, when it was very common for new young instructors to rely heavily on the content and pedagogical approaches used by their own teachers. But by the 1990s and early 2000s, however, educational researchers cultivated student-centered learning, encouraging the replacement of the sage on the stage with discussion opportunities that address carefully articulated learning objectives through questioning, comparison, and debate. Most faculty members sat through many mandatory workshops on how to create more dynamic classroom environments using the revised version of Bloom's taxonomy, which focused on verbs instead of nouns and that valued creation over evaluation. This information became common knowledge for all but the most entrenched curmudgeons on the faculty by the turn of the 21st century. Fast forward to the second decade of the 21st century, where flipped classrooms and active learning have become the name of the game in education more generally. A flipped classroom, if you don't know that term, is a learning environment that asks students to do passive activities like reading or watching recorded lectures at home, so that in-class time can be spent on live problem solving and collaboration. This notion is not foreign to design educators, of course, because we've been using project-based learning to encourage students to apply their growing knowledge since design education began. It makes a lot of sense in studios and even many technical courses where students learn to use tools and techniques that can be applied to varying challenges. But for instructors who teach history, theory, and other types of presumably fixed knowledge, The creation of active learning experiences can feel challenging. Research on approaches to teaching history does credit active learning features such as discussion and field trips as key to successful student engagement. But expanding resources that catalog and explain historic developments increasingly found at our fingertips, it's easy for students to cultivate the impression that historical knowledge is always available, so why bother learning it? Through an iterative pedagogy, I've been investigating questions about what the learning objectives for design history should be and how they should be acted upon throughout the course of my career. The introductory course I describe here covers a broad range of time and cultures from the ancient era to the present and from east to west. It is therefore not comprehensive, focusing on key moments in time when cultural and technological developments triggered evolutions in design that are associated with communication, products, and the evolving built environment. Now, like most of us, the COVID-19 pandemic in the spring of 2020 sent me into isolation. And luckily, I was already experimenting with providing some online course content that same term. So my transition to online teaching was manageable by comparison to most of my colleagues. And as we plan to return to campus in autumn of 2020, I made the calculated decision to keep the course online and fully asynchronous. And I've been teaching it that way ever since. I chose to teach online and asynchronously because while I believe that I'm a pretty good lecturer and storyteller, I was finding it increasingly difficult to get students in a large lecture hall to pay attention and engage with me. Also, I want to encourage my students to use supportive multimedia resources that extend beyond lectures by me more fully. I wanted and still do want to encourage my students' independence and their sense of responsibility for their own learning. And finally, I hope to increase students' opportunities to find examples of history in the world around them so that it doesn't just seem like distant, unrelatable trivia being delivered in the dark in a big room on the university campus. But believe it or not, teaching a subject area like history with presumably fixed knowledge still requires constant revision and updating. And the iterative nature of my pedagogical approach has meant that I never teach my course the exact same way twice. And for this reason, much to my colleagues' dismay, and to accommodate the need to refresh content regularly, I don't reuse my recorded lectures. I make them fresh every semester. Now, the structure of the course doesn't really change, although I've made a couple of shifts, and they're described here on this slide. I do use modules and time that aligns with relatively predictable multicultural eras to organize the course. Each module contained originally a range of numbers of components or elements, maybe 5 or 6, sometimes even 7. These always include at least 2 recorded lectures by me, at least 1 reading, at least 1 other video to watch, and often they also included a podcast to listen to or a website to explore. To help enhance students' understanding of the module's contextual context, I also include an optional example of 1 or 2 works of music from the era and culture being considered in the module. Although I'm not convinced that very many students engage with those optional components. Initially, I relied on Canvas, which is our learning management system, to provide a substantial auto-graded multiple choice quiz to cover key content for each module. And I manually graded reflection question responses that connected to each module's topic or theme. Now, the content of the modules has evolved, as I constantly discover clearer and more focused and accessible digital resources. And now I use a regular pattern so that each module includes the same number and type of elements. And this helps students manage their time. Each module starts with a lengthier, largely thematic lecture by me, and it ends with another brief lecture that I call a person, place, and thing presentation. Now, these smaller lectures only feature focused information about an iconic individual, a location, and an artifact that helps summarize the key ideas presented in the module in its entirety. Also, each module element now has an open 4-point quiz associated with it in place of that one large module quiz. And so the quizzes serve more as guides to the elements and less as devices for assessment. Students don't have extensive opportunities to practice writing in our design program. So the learning objectives for the history course include helping students develop their use of narrative and storytelling to communicate historical information. I also believe that helping students make connections between history and their own experiences enhances knowledge acquisition. Therefore, beyond the robust module content just described, I use projects that are to be completed alongside but independent from the modules to address these goals. And this is where much of my iteration has occurred. Now, first, the number and type of projects has changed quite a bit over time as I've sought the most appropriate workload for students in this 3-credit course. I began by requiring 2 large projects. This is what I was doing before I started teaching online. Then I cut back to 5 small ones, and now I ask students to complete 4, which equate to about 1 modest independent effort by them per month. I've also sought projects that can be completed independently with success, which means that their briefs have been refined for greater specificity over time. Now, when I only required 2 projects, they encourage students to spend time discerning and connecting artifacts and exploring the possibilities of writing different narrative forms. The first project, called Exhibiting Roots Through Design, asks students to adopt the mindset of a curator, to investigate the history of their place of origin, whether at the town or city level, or state or province or territory, or even country in some cases. I asked them to select 4 examples of designed spaces, objects, or graphics that connected to the history of their home to feature in a small hypothetical exhibition. And they produced an exhibition proposal for a set of 4 artifacts that told a coherent story that spanned at least 100 years. For the second project, students used used a list of famous designers that I provided to interview over lunch at a cafe in a locale of their own choosing. Of course, this was hypothetical. Students wrote a fictional story about the encounter based on one of 3 premises. They either asked each designer to describe their favorite project to the other designer and to explain why they preferred that project, or they asked each designer to describe a major challenge they encountered in their life and to relate how that influenced their design career. Or they asked each designer to talk about the role of education in their lives, whether or not it was formal study or learning through experience. Students were also asked to gather information about cultural factors such as wars or other types of life-altering political, scientific, or cultural events, and to interpret their impacts on the designers' biographies. Now, the need to iterate came from my discovery that without more immediate and direct feedback or suggestions from me, In beginning level, university students are not as rigorous in their pursuit of information as I would like them to be. Big shock. Also, when presented with an opportunity to write fiction or narrative, many students struggled to not write formally. These assignments succeeded in dividing the best students from the pack, but ultimately, I worried that the challenge to write in new formats may be distracting the students from the substance of their essays. And I suppose I should mention that I usually have more than 100 students in the course. So after 3 years, I grew tired of reading about the history of steel and rubber manufacturing and the use of agricultural implements because most of my students are from Ohio. And I worried at the same time that the place of origin assignment might disadvantage international students who didn't always have equivalent access to source material on the internet or even from our library system. I also found that while the reflection questions did help a lot of students focus on key ideas within course content, reading those responses from more than 100 students each week was more labor intensive than it was valuable as an assessment tool. I also discovered that students who cared more about their grade than learning, and there were a few of those, were likely to simply look up the answers to the module quiz questions rather than exploring the assigned material in its entirety. So I found that it was time to iterate again. So in addition to regulating module content and modifying the use of quizzes and expecting them to be used more as guides, the new assignment briefs that were shorter used in the course became the following. The first one was Journey Around Your Room. And this is a short essay that requires students to use careful observation and thick description to describe an area of a room in which they reside as though it were a landscape. This assignment is inspired by an excerpt they read from Xavier de Mastre's 1794 manuscript entitled Voyage Around My Room, which the author wrote while under house arrest for 42 days in his own bedroom at the end of the 18th century. The second is called What's in the Archive. And this is an exercise in using the library's website to mimic historical research processes that require you to hunt for something specific. Students are asked and given very precise instructions to find a particular medieval manuscript that's held by Ohio State University and to search it for two specific images within its pages. And this assignment is particularly useful for encouraging anyone who can't find something to just keep looking. The third assignment was called Time to Time, Comparing Objects. In this one, students were asked to read about the history of timekeeping and then to choose two analog clocks or watch designs within at least 100 years. With at least 100 years between them and between their years of production. And using an online collection from a museum, students were asked to seek insights into technological developments, the evolution of materials, and the role of culture in its perception of structured time, as well as considering the role of decorative style in their objects' designs. And the fourth was reading a photograph. And this one asks students to study the famous photograph of photographer Margaret Bourke-White, which was taken while she was perched on top of the Chrysler Building in New York City in 1930. Each then addressed the various aspects of technology and design that the image represents. And finally, the last assignment was be a design collector. Using a set of design auction websites that include multiple images, details, and selling prices for a range of artifacts from different time periods and cultures, students were presented with the hypothetical opportunity to use 50,000 US dollars to purchase 8 objects that must include something to sit on, something to hang on a wall, two objects to set on a shelf, table, or pedestal, and a showpiece or favorite item with which they would never want to part. Collections are to be focused by time, with each artifact coming from the same decade, or focused by place, with each originating in the same country or region. And all should be assembled with some shared physical property, such as line or shape, material or color, in mind. Now, when originally assigned, I also asked students to identify where they pretended to live when they were making their hypothetical purchases and forming a collection. Could be anywhere in the world as part of this hypothetical scenario. But I eventually dropped that question from the assignment when it became clear that a lot of students were reluctant to leave places with which they were familiar. Ohio. So even in a dream scenario, and I found that prospect kind of depressing. So today, as I offer the course, I've made additional refinements to these assignments. I've actually replaced the clock comparison and the photograph analysis assignments when it became difficult to assess because students had an increasing reliance on the use of AI when writing. And this has caused me to rethink how to approach asking students to write straightforward essays about objective topics. Artificial intelligence has us all reconsidering the opportunities for learning enhancement it presents, along with the hurdles it creates when attempting to build certain thinking and writing skills. So, limiting the course to 4 assignments beyond the modules, I've chosen to focus the learning objectives on exposing students to manual research strategies. And I've retained the chance to build skills in observation and description with Journey Around Your Room, along with the chance to teach students to hunt in an archival resource. But I've added a new assignment called Design and the Magazine. And this one gives students access to an online archive of issues of an American shelter magazine called House and Garden, which was published between 1901 and 2007. I ask students to select a single issue and to track and categorize both the topics of the articles and the products being advertised in the issues pages, and to keep a tally of those things, and then to represent their data using tables. They also use this information to inform a brief essay about what the articles say about their design-related ideas from a past era, and how persuasion is used in the advertisements at that time. After running this assignment twice, I realized that students like it. They've never really looked at old magazines before, but they do tend to gravitate to the more recent issues that were published, perhaps just barely, within their own lifetimes. So, in the next iteration of this assignment, I will specify that selected issues must fall within the narrower window of 1901 to 1991, which, yes, is historic to them. So, to close, I will summarize what my iterative approach to the development of my asynchronous online course has taught me. Well, many things, but they include: when you can't see or hear your students, it's best to curate the course content that animates and engages you as the instructor. Students seem to really like my course, but in part, I think it's because they feel like I'm talking to them personally about things that I'm passionate about. Secondly, having a planned and predictable course structure should not keep you from refreshing course content. Students are less frustrated if the navigation of the course components is intuitive, but they are more engaged when course contents take them by surprise every once in a while. The best assignments challenge students to work with data and information in a format that invites a creative form of presentation. So ask yourselves when formal writing is required and why, and when it can be suspended to convey what has been learned in other ways. Do that. A practical note: do not presume that your students can cite sources in a specific style size and format images correctly, or create tables easily or well. I have found that digital natives often lack what I might consider very basic word processing and writing skills. So it's always a good idea to provide very specific step-by-step guidance in assignment briefs. And examples are helpful as well. And finally, even when course design and content are working well, look for ways to change things up, to tap into new technologies, issues, and concerns. Students appreciate it when their instructors take a few risks or make connections to the current moment. Whether you're teaching face-to-face or in less immediate formats, and whether your subject matter is about history or not. Well, thanks very much for your attention to this recording. If you'd like any additional information about the course that I teach, or if you'd like to see what the assignment briefs look like, I welcome your questions. Please contact me. Again, my name is Marianne Beecher. I'm a professor of design at Ohio State, and my email address is my last name, beecher.17 @osu.edu. Thanks again, and enjoy the conference.